Few names in sports carry the same weight as John Wooden. To most, he's the legendary coach who led UCLA to 10 national championships in 12 years, building a dynasty that may never be matched. But to those who knew him best, Wooden was something more: a teacher, a mentor, and a man whose definition of success had little to do with the scoreboard. His message extends far beyond basketball. It's about character, discipline, helping others, paying attention to the details, and always giving it your best. In this blink, you'll journey with Wooden from his boyhood on an Indiana farm to the bright lights of Los Angeles. Along the way, you'll hear about the lessons from his father, the pyramid of success, the rise of UCLA basketball, the players who shaped his teams, and the love of his life, Nell. More than trophies and titles, Wooden leaves us all with wisdom about how to strive each day to make life a masterpiece. John Wooden's story begins on a small farm in Centerton, Indiana, where life was simple, but lessons were lasting. Many of those lessons came from his father, Joshua Hugh Wooden, who was a man of modest means but carried with him some deep wisdom. When John graduated from grade school, his father handed him a worn $2 bill and a card inscribed with 7 rules for life. Those rules included: be true to yourself, help others, make each day your masterpiece, and make friendship a fine art. They were simple on the surface, but Wooden carried them like a compass for the rest of his days. The family didn't have much. Wooden worked hard on the farm, learned thrift, and discovered how faith, family, and honesty could steady a person even in lean years. He also fell in love with basketball. The makeshift hoop his father nailed to the barn became his first training ground. He was never the tallest or the strongest, but he quickly saw that hard work, hustle, conditioning, and practicing the fundamentals could close the gap. Along with his father's wisdom, Wooden was fortunate to learn from some tough but smart coaches during his school years. At Martinsville High was Coach Glenn Curtis, who emphasized discipline and fundamentals. Curtis taught him that selfishness, arrogance, and envy had no place on a team. Those lessons, absorbed in sweaty practices and tense locker rooms, would go on to shape Wooden's own philosophy. Wooden shined on his high school basketball team, and he went on to play for Purdue, where he learned a lot more under the guidance of Coach Ward "Piggy" Lambert. Lambert was a brilliant strategist and mentor who taught him the value of speed, conditioning, and fundamentals. By breaking the game down so that his players could isolate and master its core elements, Lambert was ahead of his time. At Purdue, Wooden continued to make a name for himself on the court. In fact, he earned the nickname the India Rubber Man for the way he bounced back up after being knocked down. What Wooden lacked in height, he made up for with his fitness and execution. Purdue thrived under Lambert's system, winning national recognition in the form of 3 All-American honors. Even as Wooden was earning glory on the basketball court, he remained grounded. To begin with, he was always a working student. The Great Depression made money scarce, so he took summer jobs with the highway department, painted stadium bleachers, and even crafted Purdue-colored ribbons to sell for pocket change. Every dime mattered, and every hour of work reinforced his belief that perseverance and sacrifice were the price of progress. Fortunately, he also had Nellie Riley by his side. He met Nell in high school, and she would remain his lifelong partner, cheering him on from the stands throughout his career as a player and coach. She was his anchor, giving him the courage and support he needed to pursue his dreams. By the time he left Purdue, Wooden had learned a lot, and he had a degree in English and a Big Ten Medal of Honor to show for it. But perhaps the biggest thing he took away was what he'd learned from Lambert and his father: the fundamental idea that success doesn't come by being better than others. Rather, it comes from reaching your own potential. Those lessons would serve him well, because when he graduated in 1932, Wooden was stepping into adulthood during uncertain times. He married his high school sweetheart, Nell, just days after losing his entire savings when the Martinsville Bank went under. On their wedding night, he had only $2 to his name, the same bill his father had given him years before. It was going to take a whole lot of love and determination to get through it all. Wooden was fortunate that he was able to find a job in Kentucky as a coach and English teacher at Dayton High School. But as it turned out, it was just as much a learning experience for him. He soon discovered that he was a pretty poor coach, too impatient, too critical, and too quick to lose his temper when players couldn't match his expectations. But the classroom saved him. Teaching literature required careful preparation, patience, and adaptability. Skills he quickly transferred over into the gym. By his second year, his basketball team was winning. Wooden took what he learned in Kentucky back to Indiana after accepting a coaching job at South Bend Central High School. But his career was sidetracked when World War II reached the U.S. Wooden served as a Navy lieutenant, and when he returned to South Bend in 1946, he knew he was ready to move on to college coaching. He found a job at Indiana State Teachers College, which is where he found the right conditions to test out Piggy Lambert's fast break style. It proved to be instantly effective as other teams were dumbstruck and unable to adapt. Wooden was earning a name for himself. His teams won, but he was also made to prove his own moral character when Clarence Walker, a black student, earned a place on his team. When 2 tournaments in the South barred black players, Wooden refused to play rather than leave Walker behind. In 1948, Wooden was still ready to say no again when a tournament in Kansas City agreed to let Walker play on the condition he stay in different lodgings. But after some urging from the NAACP and talking it over with Walker and his parents, they agreed to play, making Walker the first black athlete in a national college tournament. That same year, UCLA came calling, and John and Nell packed up their family, which by then included 2 kids, Nancy Ann and Jimmy, and headed west. One of the things Wooden took with him was his Pyramid of Success, a framework that essentially summed up everything he'd learned by that point. It shows how success isn't achieved through shortcuts, but through steady growth in character and effort. At the pyramid's foundation are qualities like industriousness, friendship, loyalty, cooperation, and enthusiasm, traits that anchor everything else. As the pyramid rises, blocks like self-control, alertness, initiative, and skill build on one another, leading toward poise and confidence near the top. At the very peak sits competitive greatness, which Wooden defined as performing at your best when your best is needed. The pyramid, and Wooden's personal philosophy, was never about trophies, but rather how to become the best version of yourself, both in sports and in life, by focusing on the small, daily choices that add up to lasting success. Arriving at UCLA was far from a glamorous affair. Wooden found a struggling program, rundown facilities, and a team expected to finish last. Compared to football, basketball was an afterthought at the school. So Wooden got busy putting his formula to work, getting the team to focus on fundamentals, conditioning, and the fast break system. To everyone's surprise, including his own, the UCLA Bruins won 22 games in his first season and captured the Southern Division crown. It didn't matter that the team was relatively short in stature. They were eager to put in the effort, and it taught Wooden a crucial lesson. Never underestimate a team's potential, and never let appearances cloud belief in what players can achieve. That first UCLA team taught Wooden a great deal. He was still refining his ability to balance discipline with understanding, to talk to different players differently, based on their personality, and how to blend individuality with team spirit. For example, there was no room for big egos on Wooden's team. If a player was a ball hog and refused to pass, it didn't matter how much talent they had, they stayed on the bench until they learned to be a teammate. He also demanded neatness and insisted that players clean up after themselves in the locker room. As he saw it, sloppiness off the court led to sloppiness on it. A lot of his coaching was about character and paying attention to the little things. When done right, those little things added up to championships. Every year, UCLA was getting better, and by 1962 they reached the Final Four with a scrappy, undersized team that shocked critics by nearly toppling defending champion Cincinnati. Wooden saw it as a turning point. Now was the time to take it to the next level by unleashing the full-court press. The full-court press is a defensive strategy that means you start challenging the other team from the moment they're trying to put the ball in play under their own basket. It requires a lot of energy and strong conditioning, but with players like Walt Hazzard, Gail Goodrich, Keith Erickson, and Fred Slaughter, UCLA had the ability. And in the 1964 championship game against Duke, it worked like magic. It caused Duke to commit a number of errors and turnovers that at one point resulted in UCLA scoring 16 points in just 2 minutes. UCLA had won its first national title, and it wouldn't be their last. A year later, they won again. As a result, UCLA soon became a magnet for talent. And in 1967, that talent included a towering center from New York, Louis Ferdinand Alcindor Jr., later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Wooden was immediately impressed with Alcindor, and not just because he stood over 7 feet tall. Even as a college student, he carried himself with such poise and self-control that Wooden was reminded of his father's own quiet strength. Lou Alcindor was an immediate sensation. In some games, he was scoring upward of 30 points alone. Managing a team that has one member receiving so much attention isn't easy, but Wooden made a point of spreading his praise around and reminding everyone that no one is capable of greatness on the court without a great team around them. The results were undeniable. With Alcindor and his teammates, UCLA won 3 straight championships. Alcindor's years on the team were followed by the Bill Walton era. Talk about a study in contrasts. Whereas Alcindor was calm, graceful, and stoic, Walton was boisterous, fiery, and outspoken. Still, Walton was immensely talented and served as the anchor for 3 remarkable seasons, including 2 perfect 30-0 seasons. From 1972 to 1974, UCLA's streak stretched to 88 straight wins, an achievement Wooden called meaningful not for the number, but for the consistency it represented. Part of that consistency may be due to the fact that Wooden never talked about the team they were going to play. Players joked that if they wanted to know who they were going to play next, they had to check the newspapers. Wooden's emphasis was always internal, not external. It doesn't matter who you're playing, all you need to focus on is showing up and doing the best you can. But having a streak like the one UCLA was on may have brought about its own problems. It felt like the team was getting complacent. In 1974, their streak and their championship run ended when they lost to North Carolina State, a team they'd beaten soundly earlier in the season. Wooden wasn't upset at the loss. It was the erosion of effort that stung. If they'd lost while putting in their best effort, it wouldn't have bothered him at all. It was one of his core tenets. Success comes from the peace of mind of knowing you gave your best. Still, when the 1975 season started, Wooden felt like he had little to prove. 9 national championships and countless records had been achieved. Yet he did have an interesting challenge before him. The only starter from the previous season that remained on the team was David Myers. Everyone was assuming that UCLA's dominance was over. Maybe he could prove them wrong, and at the same time prove what he'd been teaching all along, that with effort, conditioning, and mastery of the fundamentals, any team can be a success. This time, Wooden wasn't surprised when UCLA fought their way back in the Final Four for the 12th time in 14 years. In the semifinal against Louisville, the game went to overtime, and both sides played with grit and heart. After UCLA edged it with a 75-74 win, Wooden nearly collapsed. He'd just witnessed a perfect game. Was there anything left? That's when he gathered himself, walked into the press room, and announced his retirement. 2 nights later, his players gave him the perfect farewell, defeating Kentucky 92-85 for UCLA's 10th championship. Retirement freed Wooden from the grind of practice schedules, recruiting trips, and game nights. But it also freed up his wife, Nell. She was always there. At the beginning of every match, after the first huddle, she would give him a thumbs up from the stand, and he would give her a nod and a wink. Still, it wasn't easy for her. She couldn't stand the constant criticism from the press. Even when his teams were winning, the opinions were relentless. It was a relief for Wooden as well. He'd often said his greatest accomplishment had nothing to do with basketball. It was Nell, the girl he had loved since high school. Their bond had carried them through 50-plus years, and now he wanted to give her his full attention. But life tested him again. In 1984, Nell's health collapsed. Emphysema and heart trouble led to surgery, and afterward she slipped into a coma. Doctors said she'd never wake, but Wooden refused to believe it. Day after day, he sat at her bedside, holding her hand, telling stories of their life together, their dates at the ice cream parlor, the joy of raising children, the ups and downs, and countless games she'd cheered him through. 90 days passed without a flicker of response. Then one afternoon he felt a faint squeeze of his hand. It wasn't his imagination. Nell slowly came back. She returned home, frail but with her humor intact. Wooden cherished those months. But in March 1985, Nell passed away. Her death shattered him. He described himself as a pebble dropped into the deepest ocean, alone, dark, and overwhelmed by grief. For months, he could barely function. Friends feared for his life. He even admitted to moments of doubting his faith. What eventually pulled him back was family. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren brought laughter into his home again. He saw Nell in their smiles and gestures. Slowly, he healed. Looking back, Wooden always returned to the same truths. A life well lived doesn't come from money, fame, or trophies. It's being able to rest assured, knowing that you did your best to become your best. He credited his father for wisdom, his coaches for guidance, his players for lessons of patience, and Nell for filling his life with love. In the end, it all comes back to his dad's advice. Don't worry about being better than others. Worry about being the best you can be. That's the real secret to success.